So my idea was that people will work from home, primarily mothers and people with caring responsibilities that didn't want to spend the time commuting or they didn't have full-time availability. I thought if we can pool their capacity and then we find the clients and we can match that according to skills and what the client needs, then we could have a very successful outsourcing model. Let's do this.
So, what I want to do is speak to people like you who have started their own business in the legal industry and just share your stories, really. The first place to start really would just be sort of talking about Obelisk and how you started it and what kind of led you to becoming a female founder.
So I started Obelisk in 2010, but this is not my first business. I decided to go and set up my first business immediately after I qualified. So I went off, qualified in Linklaters and left in 2007. And 2008, I just had this idea that I didn't want to work for anybody else. I hadn't really enjoyed being in a law firm because I used to be a journalist. That was kind of my first career, if you like. So I loved always the kind of the roaming, the going around and, filing your story on time, finding a good story, but nobody was asking me how many coffees I had in the day or, tied me to a desk. Part of my job was to be out and meet people. So when I went to Links, obviously the atmosphere was very different. The needs were very different, but I didn't like the kind of pace and the hierarchy and, the decision making, and just the path seemed to be very long ahead, especially if you're a woman. So I went into the compliance and political risk space because one of my last jobs, in fact, my last job as a writer was the Economist Group. So I had experience of writing about economics, political economy, stuff in the news every day. And with my new kind of legal skills, I wanted to specialize in helping investors that were taking their businesses into emerging markets and helping them to understand those markets better, but in a very clear, succinct way. So I set up my business just to be in control of my own time. So I ran that company and it was a consulting firm. So that was the first time I understood the difference between a business that works really well for your lifestyle and a business that scales. And so Obelisk came as an idea that's scalable.
So for people who don't know what Obelisk is and what it does, do you want to explain a little bit about the model?
So my idea was that people will work from home, primarily mothers and people with caring responsibilities that didn't want to spend the time commuting or they didn't have full-time availability. And very often they would end up completely outside of the legal ecosystem. I thought if we can pool their capacity and then we find the clients and we can match that according to skills and what the client needs, then we could have a very successful outsourcing model.
And that was 10 years ago.
So that was July 2010. So that's when I kind of incorporated with enthusiasm. I'm sure we've all been there, logging our applications, the company's house. And I didn't even have a clear name. I just kind of took one off the shelf. But, it coincided with the opening of the legal profession and the regulatory regime changing. So we could persevere as a business, I guess. So because I was self-funded, I didn't have any investors to kind of answer to straight away. I just went on and basically, whenever somebody said, well, what about confidentiality? I'll basically have an argument saying, but, how about this and that and the other? And try to always say that everything is fixable, but you have to want to work with a new entrant. And if you always want the established firms, then, don't complain when they overcharge. Either you want the change and then you invest in the change, or you complain about how a young company doesn't have absolutely everything, which is normal. All companies start somewhere, very small, including the large enterprises, right? Anyway, so, it wasn't an easy start because I also got pregnant and I had my child in the first year. So it was quite an intense setup period, which took about 2 years, really.
Yeah. So when you got that sort of initial resistance, did you ever kind of think, oh, I've made a terrible mistake?
I think when you start, maybe this is hindsight kind of speaking, but you recognize that you've got to adapt to how the market responds. So you don't go expecting everybody else to fit your model. You're trying to sell something new and recognize that that is, you know, part of the challenge, but also it's part of the opportunity. So I didn't really have doubts around will they ever buy, or in a way I was also so busy at home with a newborn that I didn't really have the time. I had no choice but to kind of press on. I did ask my husband, and I said to him, you know, I guess because there are a lot of people that were kind of rejecting the idea around mothers and people wanting flexibility to fit around their families. Very often the kind of rejection was around, but how can I trust them, you know, because they won't be there when I need them. They're not reliable because they're the school gate, that kind of thing. And I asked him, I said, you know, do you think it's gonna, you know, will they ever change? Because it feels so sexist, you know. They trust the mothers with their children, but they don't trust to give them the work for which they've trained to be able to work on. And he said, oh, well, you know, for as long as sexism, racism, all these isms exist, I don't think, you know, you don't have a problem to resolve, because it seems to be so difficult and so deeply rooted that we seem to struggle really to shake it off. So, and it's not just sexism, but all these other forms of discrimination, right? And othering, if you like. And he said, oh, you know, the rate it's going, our daughter can inherit it, you know, it can definitely, she probably will have the work still to inherit and push on. I said, you know, you just have to insist and persevere and see where it takes you. But being afraid of trying is not my kind of mantra, I think. I'd rather regret. I really don't want to regret not trying something. So if I'll regret, you know, the regret basically. So I always try, and then if it doesn't work, you just change something or you drop it. I mean, there's no shame in not, you know, succeeding every time.
So you persevered, and it's now 2020. So sort of in a nutshell, what's happened over the last 10 years? How's the business grown?
Well, the business has grown from nothing to multi-million turnover, over 2,000 lawyers on the platform. Technology that we built for the last 5 years. We really know our stuff when it comes to managing people in a distributed working pattern. And this year we also got an Innovate UK grant for our technology to build out the whole remote working productivity around it. So a lot has happened in 10 years, but definitely in the way I kind of envisaged, you know, so more of the scale. And I don't really work on the legal work. So that was kind of, if you like, my rule number one was when I started this business was the temptation when you're a lawyer or you're a technical entrepreneur is to always feel that you have, if you like, the knowledge to intervene. And I felt that was one of the things that if I did, I would get in the way of the growth of the business. So I've only ever used my time on running the business, thinking about the strategy, never really on the legal work. I've always had to have other people do it, which probably has resulted in being able to scale more quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I can relate to that.
It interested me what people did in business, but not just the legal aspects of it. I kind of realized that I was much more interested in running something than creating the documents. Although I value that input, you know, we've got our own in-house lawyer, and I don't think it's absolutely necessary really to have all the kind of infrastructure properly, you know, set up. I don't have any attraction towards legal work, but I still use, if you like, the kind of things I've learned from being an employment lawyer around how you build a culture and how you treat your people. So, you know, to avoid the wrong destination. So I think there's valuable things I've learned, but I don't miss the legal work. It's almost a necessary transition once you're past a certain stage, I think. Yeah. You just can't be everything.
I think that's one of the really interesting points. So, you know, all the female founders that I'm talking to are all in a similar position where they're focused on running their business and not so much on being a lawyer anymore. But when you look at the partnerships of the traditional law firms, then delivering legal services is still a massive part of their role, with less emphasis on running the business, managing the team.
Yeah, I mean, I think the traditional model is an interesting one, because also the whole, if you like, assessment of what is a successful law firm is very much aligned to the kind of directories, entries and awards and whatever. So, people recognize that they want to see the technical skill, and they don't really want to know about how you run it. And I don't know how that will change and how long it will change, because a lot of it is linked to, the kind of outsourcers are maybe brands where we go for the brand as opposed to the individuals within it. But in the traditional kind of law firm space, the traditional partnership model encourages that thinking around, lateral hires and lateral moves and rainmakers, and it's almost like its own vocabulary, right?
Yeah.
And it's not compatible with good management practices. But if you like, the kind of market and the regulations changing, but the way in which it's assessed is not necessarily changing.
Thinking back to you as an NQ at Linklaters, feeling the way that you were feeling and frustrated, what advice would you give to women working in law, feeling like they don't belong there and not knowing what to do next?
I think, to be honest, it's worth asking yourself what kind of law firm you want to be in and what kind of legal work you want to do. Because I think there is a kind of, a certain type of work that you can only get in a Magic Circle law firm, and they will require a certain way of working. So I would say, ask yourself what kind of area of law you want to be involved with and what kind of clients you want to work with, because that will determine a lot of the next steps. You could end up, and this is how I thought about it. I asked myself, well, does this make sense? Do I want to be doing this for a few more years? Why am I doing it, and what am I trying to achieve? And I concluded, for a variety of personal reasons, that actually I was done with what I wanted to learn. And I didn't want the kind of, to try and climb the ladder internally. I didn't want to be a partner there. I didn't feel I wanted to wait for 20 years or 15 years, depending how many children I have. And the other thing that I remember I was very clear about in my head was that if I make a different choice, like setting up from nothing, that was the time when you have less to lose, you have less fear of failure. So I decided there was no point taking a bigger paycheck and then, setting my lifestyle up against a big wage, going to an American firm to be paid even more, all these options I considered, because there's so many things you can do. And then at the end of the day, I said, well, I can do all of that, but I will actually fool myself into delaying my decision for, 4 or 5 years. And if I have a child or something, then even longer. And then I would look back and say, why did I do it? I did it for money. I did it for what? So I would say, well, it's always easier to say than to do it. But you need to figure out what it is that you want to achieve in 5 years' time. And where would you like to be and where will you be happy? And then things start falling into place. Otherwise, you go along because you're afraid, and you do get paid more because that's how law works. And then it becomes more difficult to quit. So that's my advice, is you just have to figure out what is your tolerance level for change and what is your budgetary tolerance for change. And when you are at the beginning, it's easier because you have less income and therefore less to lose.
I think that's really great advice.
I didn't ever think I'll be an entrepreneur, to be honest. It wasn't like a childhood dream or something. I come from a communist country. There was no entrepreneurs, no market economy, no capital, nothing,
When did you realize that's what you wanted to do?
I don't know I ever realized, really. So I just I had an idea, because I have a lot of ideas. So the idea came to me, I figured out a plan, and I gave it a shot, and then it was doing quite well, and I thought, well, maybe I'm good at this,